Hi everybody. Today I talk with a very talented illustrator, Ash Lamb. There's a very good chance you've probably seen Ash's creations in your timeline. He is well known for creating the minimalistic illustrations that capture interesting ideas and observations about life. You can see some examples on the screen right now of some of his more recent creations. During our chat, we talk about everything from how he got started, the key to marketing online, the power of platforms, extending the idea of open world video games to real life, artificial intelligence, and a whole lot more. This is going to be a fun chat. You don't want to miss this, so stick around. Nope, there's no zero. Ash, great to chat with you. I've been following your content online for a very long time. I've also been following your content stolen and reposted by other people for probably
Oh,
a
yeah.
longer period of time. We'll talk more about that. But just introduce yourself.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I just want to let the audience know that this is my first proper podcast, so it's an absolute pleasure to do it with you. And my name is Ash Lamb. I'm 22 years old. I turned 22 in January, and I've been a content creator for about 2 years. So it was all a coincidence. I'll get into the story later on. But I've been creating visual ideas, especially on Twitter, for about 2 years. Visual ideas on philosophy, business, life, anything that I'm curious about. I create visuals and I share them for everyone to see.
So I have to ask, what got you started? How do you begin? Like, at what point did you decide I'm going to get into computer, I'm going to tech, I'm going to create visuals, and then share them? So I want to hear the full journey.
Okay, so it's a pretty interesting story. So I was working at a web design agency and it was my first like full-time job, and I was feeling a bit lethargic, a bit bored, and I was procrastinating one night, and I didn't want to do the work, and I was just browsing on the internet, just looking for ideas. And for some reason I decided that I wanted to turn my Notion page into a public website, and Notion didn't have that as an option. So I did a bit of research and I found this amazing platform called super.so, and I decided to use it and it went really well. And I built my first website. So that was my first website. Again, it wasn't code, but I felt really proud of myself. And I did a bit of research and I found out that this platform wasn't built by some large corporation. It was built by someone like me, someone young that liked to build things for other people. But this person was documenting the journey on Twitter. So he was essentially making the whole journey public for everyone to see. And I decided to create a Twitter account just to follow his work. I didn't have any intention of posting my own stuff, but one thing led to another and I fell down the rabbit hole and I decided to start posting my own ideas without any success. I got like 0 likes on average, but I kept going and I kept going and I kept being introduced to other people creating different stuff. And that's when I discovered Jack Butcher. And he's a I think he's from Britain. And he's a visualizer, very popular visualizer. And he started this whole movement of creating visual ideas. So instead of just sharing text-based tweets, grabbing an idea you find interesting and turning it into something visual. And I got his course and I learned how to do it myself, and the rest is history. So it's been a very interesting journey. And what I love the most about my journey is that it hasn't been planned. It wasn't some grand strategy. It was all curiosity, randomness, and one thing leading to another.
Yeah, as you find out, like most journeys of that sort are never planned. You know, they often talk when we're building a product, build for yourself, do something that you really love, and gradually figure out how to make it apply to a lot of people. But if you start off with the idea of like, I want to build something that's gonna like, attract a large audience, it's always like the incentives are a bit misaligned in getting you to the destination very, very quickly.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
what was the first visual you remember ever creating?
Good question. So I've always had a love for illustration. So I've always been very creative since a very, very young age. So I've always been making random drawings whenever I had the time. So I cannot remember what was my first visual, but I do remember because I started posting like just sketches on Twitter, but they weren't visual ideas. They didn't have a meaning or a message behind. And one day I realized I found this very interesting post by David Perel. And he talked about this idea called the personal monopoly, which consists in combining all your interests together instead of just focusing on one thing, specializing on one thing, just saying, okay, so I like philosophy, I like business, I like code, I like illustration. Let's put it all together and let's see what happens. And that way you stand out from the rest. So I just picked something I found interesting and I just made a visual and I fell in love with it because people resonated with it. Because when there's a message behind, other people want to tune in and comment and share it with their friends.
Very true. And in terms of like, what was your inspiration for some of the early visuals you drew? Like, I used to sketch a lot as a kid, and for me, it was video games. I used to take like all the video game characters, and it's like sketch them. Like Mega Man was my favorite character, and like all the Super Mario characters and so on. So for
Oh,
you,
yeah.
when you started illustration, what was your thing you often like gravitated towards?
That's interesting. So I've always been a Nintendo fan. So I'm a huge fan of Zelda. Zelda is my all-time favorite game. Mario Kart, obviously, Mario Brothers. So those franchises have always inspired me a lot, like a lot. And I started playing Zelda when I was maybe 10 years old. So it's always been in the back of my mind. And even though my work doesn't really resemble that style, it's always been inspiring to me to put my own ideas into the world and try to create a story because I always try to include a little character in my visuals. That's what I do differently because I like to make things a little bit more playful. So instead of just creating vector based, like very elegant visuals, I like to make things a bit more fun and treat it as if it was a game.
You know, I have to ask you about this. Which Zelda was your favorite one you started with?
Ocarina of Time.
Ocarina of Time. Okay, I'm dating
What
myself here.
about you?
Link to the Past, the
Link to
SNES.
the Past. Wow,
Yeah,
amazing one.
I think Zelda's Awakening on like I think the handheld ones. I think it's a very similar visual style. The isometric top-down view, where it's not completely flat, but has a slight fake 3D
Okay.
version.
Yes, yes, I know that. Yeah, yeah, exactly. For which console was Link to the Past?
Super Nintendo. This was like
Super
probably
Nintendo.
1993 or
Okay,
1992 when it came out, and that was my first
interesting.
foray into an open-ended action RPG game. Because I always played linear games where you just like start off as a clear destination. That was the first game where I was like, wait, I have options in how I could actually complete my levels, and that completely opened up a whole new world for me. And in many ways, that also like had a big influence on like how I approached my career and just life in general as well. It's like there are opportunities and open-ended questions that you don't have to answer in the order it's meant to be answered. You can take side quests and just like do other fun things and then get back to the main activity at some point later on.
Well, that's a really good point because I always like to think that the greatest game there is the great online game, you know? I used to be
Exactly.
pretty addicted to video games when I was younger. And that was until I realized that why play video games if I can just, be on social media, growing my own thing and connecting with others. It's almost the same as you say. You can take all the side quests you want. You can also take big main quests and try to build a big product. There's so much to do that there's no time left to play video games.
Yep. Did you ever play like some of the bigger RPGs like Skyrim or Fallout and things like
Oh,
that?
definitely. Look, my favorite RPG is The Witcher.
Oh,
Have
absolutely.
you played The Witcher 3?
I have that's the one game I played completely into and almost 200 300 hours fully all the
Me
expansion
too.
packs.
It's
Yeah,
great.
I think it's like it's one of those games where the story is just absolutely fantastic, gripping,
Yeah.
very open-ended, but the visuals are amazing as well. Like every now and then, you just like go over a hill and you see like the water, the castle, and you see like the light coming through. It's like it's almost like a mixture of like Lord of the Rings and like Zelda, all the best of the music. It's fantastic.
You can even take pictures, I think, inside the game. So just imagine how beautiful it is that the developers decided to add this feature. It's so fun.
Exactly. I never played the remastered version though. They re-released The Witcher on like the more modern consoles. I think both the PS5 and the Xbox X. And I think same with
Okay.
Skyrim as well. They really like, but the graphics were great. If you thought it was great back then, they made it even nicer. Believe it or not,
Yeah.
this version.
Yeah.
I haven't tried those yet. My time for gaming has gone down quite a bit, but that's
Exactly.
actually really cool.
Exactly.
It's actually really cool that you played some of those games as well because there's something about like you mentioned everything we do online is very much like that. Like everyone you interact with like an NPC and you actually talk to them, you realize oh they're actually real. They have like like there's a story arc to them. There's a character path between that, And the thing that always struck me the most about these kind of games is that I find that so many things we do as in our everyday life is a game of probability, and in all these games you have like skills you can, increase. And the higher skill level, the higher probability of being able to be successful in like a negotiation or like,
Yeah.
some act of like, some act you're doing. And so even today, whenever I encounter like something at work or in my side projects where I'm like, okay, my chance of getting the answer I want here is probably 30%. What can I do to increase its odds a little bit? And that mentality comes 100% from games like Fallout and The Witcher and so on, where you have to kind of figure, okay, I can't deal with this, lock right now, or I can't go to this area until I strengthen myself in these areas before I do that. And so I go finish all the side quests and come back to it, and then I'm like, oh, this is very trivial, and I apply that to life all the time.
As you mentioned before, that's a beauty of playing games that aren't linear, you know? Open world games are so fun. That's why they take ages to complete, because you can almost invent your own story. That's why they're so addictive.
Yep. I mean, we can talk about games all day, and maybe one day we probably could, maybe in real life
Yeah,
at some point. But no,
sure.
let's get back to your the work you've been doing online. So when did you realize that you were onto something big here? Because you mentioned when you first started posting things, there you weren't getting a lot of traction, but then something over a period of time though started clicking. What was that?
So here's my secret recipe, I like to call it, and it's pretty simple. I like to call it, well, I didn't invent the name, Jack Butcher invented the name, but it's basically permissionless apprentice. So instead of talking about yourself and just posting things that are related to your own story, make a list of people you look up to and try to add value to them in public. So that's the key, always in public. So most people just would send an email, a private email to someone. Instead, just do it on Twitter, for example. And that way, they are much more likely to share it with their audience. And then their audience will see your stuff, and people will be more interested in you as a byproduct of helping someone else. So that's what worked the best for me. And this wasn't a strategy at the time. It just happened. But because I had so many heroes I looked up to, I just liked visualizing their most popular quotes, and most of them saw them and shared them with their audience, and that helped me grow in a very short period of time. And I had so much fun because I got to even meet some of them, which was mind blowing to me, completely surreal.
And when you were creating them, I'm assuming you put like your Twitter handle in the image itself, so even if it was shared without the context, people would know where to go back to be able to see it.
Exactly. Exactly. Which I didn't, by the way, at the start. I made the mistake to not add my domain because, again, I was really naive and I thought that no one would steal my work. But people always find a way to get back to you. If they are interested in you, they'll find a way by asking others or just reverse engineering how the visual was shared. But again, it's great fun. It was surreal for me to visualize someone's quote and then see them like it, comment on it, and share it with their audience. And
Yep.
that's how I managed to connect with others.
Yeah, and that's how I actually ended up finding you. Actually, I actually ended up doing a Google image search, like a reverse image search on someone who
Oh,
had some.
really?
There was no comment under, like, the website. Maybe it's been early on, or someone may have actually removed it. Not accidentally, they deliberately removed it. And but I was able to like find you, and that's how I was like, oh wow, this is actually really cool work, and I've been like following you, from
Oh,
then
that's
on.
cool.
So your visual style has been very consistent. It's changed a little bit over the years. I've been like following some of your earlier images, like it changed over time. But you pretty much had a good vision from the very beginning that you just stayed at it. How did that come about?
So it is true that it's changed quite a bit throughout the years because I like a philosophy I have when it comes to creativity is perfection through iteration, not revision. So instead of trying to come up with a perfect style and then sharing it with the world, just makes tiny iterations every week, every month. And then you can see how your style slowly improves as time goes on. But yes, I love to keep things minimal, simple, to the point, sustainable, right? Because I cannot spend hours and hours on every visual because that would be unsustainable in the long term. So I just like to keep it simple, straight to the point, so people can absorb the idea much faster, reduce the amount of colors I use. I always use the same line thickness. It's a 14 pixel thickness on Procreate, which is my tool of choice. And yes, it works really well, adding constraints to your work so you can do things much faster and you don't have to spend hours thinking about each decision, and you can just focus on the message, on the essence.
What tools do you use? So you mentioned you use Procreate. What's your setup?
Exactly. So I basically use the basic version of Procreate on my iPad, which is a secondhand 11-inch iPad with the Apple Pencil, which is amazing. And then I sometimes edit the visuals after on my Mac using Affinity. But that's it. It's pretty simple. There's no complicated setup going on. It's just pretty straightforward.
Yeah, you often shared regularly that it doesn't matter what tools you're ultimately using. It's the idea and the output that matters, and there are many ways of creating it.
Exactly. I keep getting DMs by people who are just starting out in their journey asking me, what tools do I use? Because they think that the tools are what make the biggest difference. But that's not true. I've seen people share visuals drawn on a napkin, literally, like just taking a picture with their phone and posting them. And they perform better than my visuals because they are more authentic. That there's something to them that people resonate with. So there are no excuses. Whatever you have, just do what you can, and you can upgrade your tools as you go.
Yep. Do you ever see a world where you mentioned about like how you can very quickly get visuals out? We have to ask AI, of course, is like a really big thing these days. And do you ever see a world where you might look into a situation where, like, the important, unique thing you add, like, your personal monopoly is the ideas you have on the table, how it gets created, it can learn on your previous style, and then you might use an AI to basically create the visuals for yourself. Do you ever see yourself doing that?
I've made a few experiments, and here's the issue with AI in its current form, obviously. AI cannot, as far as I'm concerned, cannot reproduce such precise visuals because, again, I spend the most time thinking about the idea, not so much about how it will visually look. And that AI has a hard time doing. For example, if I create, because I use metaphors, visual metaphors to communicate ideas. And that's pretty tricky to do with AI because you have to be in fact, it takes longer to write the correct prompts than to make the visual by hand. It would take ages to tell AI exactly what you want on, exactly which elements you want in the image, in what way, what size. It's too precise. So AI just creates very like rough sketches that you can use as reference, but you have to edit them a lot in order to create something that communicates an idea.
Yep. No, that is very true, and it's one of the things also that keeps evolving over a period of time. Like what AI was able to do like a year ago, it's like we've grown leaps and bounds. It seems like in that time. If you take
Yes,
Sora, for example,
that's
the
true.
video generation one, you're like, wait, how did we go from like really bad versions of Will Smith eating like pizza or something or French fries to now
Yeah,
like
spaghetti. Yeah.
yeah, spaghetti, right? To now like more realistic versions of like a cat walking through this like busy field. It looks mostly realistic. So it's one of those things where like just have to keep watching it to see where the future of it might ultimately go.
Exactly. We'll see. I mean, apparently the difference is quite big. So maybe in a few years from now, AI can make visuals with a click of a button, like visual ideas, not just visuals. We'll
E- e-
see.
exactly. So when at some point, right, you decided you're getting a lot of traction, you're doing really well in this, and I think you launched a course, right, like a course that people can sign up to learn more. How did that come about? Like when did you decide that, okay, now I've hit critical mass, where I think I want to share my learnings with a broader audience?
So again, I kept getting emails. So I started a newsletter before launching my course just to go more in depth into my process and whatnot. And I kept getting emails from people asking me how I was creating visuals. And at one day I decided that, again, I had no other option. I had to make a course because everyone wanted to know what my process was. And it would be a pretty interesting way to monetize my little internet project. So again, I blocked out maybe 1 or 2 months to put down everything I knew about creativity and visuals on a Notion document. And I created a reduced version of the course I shared it with a few early users, and with their feedback, I kept making iterations until I had something more extensive. And it went really well. People loved my course because it helped them communicate their ideas, even if they weren't looking to become a content creator. It helped maybe in presentations, for example. I had many professionals who wanted a way to make more engaging presentations instead of using old, boring, PowerPoint slides. They wanted a way to make their audience, their like physical audience, more engaged in the room. So visuals worked well for that. And now I'm working on the second iteration of the course. I decided to take it down to free up some time to work on the next edition. And I want to make something a bit more condensed because on the first version, I got a bit too obsessed with adding fluff to make it feel, like a real course. I thought that the longer the better, but that's not always the case.
Yeah, very true. Do you charge for the course?
Yes, I did when it was available,
How did
around $199.
how
So
did you
that
come up,
was the base price. Yeah,
how
go
did you
ahead.
come up with the price for that?
Oh, I can't remember. I think I just made a list of courses that I had taken, and I just, came up with an average price point, and I used that as the first price for the course.
Yeah, because one of the hardest parts oftentimes is like knowing what do you charge for something. You don't want to undercharge yourself, but you also don't want to overcharge. And it seems like your approach has actually have hit all the right spots.
Exactly. And you can always ask your audience. People forget that they can always ask people what they think. Just ask them, make an open question. What would you pay for this? Or what would you think would be a fair price for this? And you'll get a lot of people will be willing to share their thoughts with you. And then you can come up with a middle ground and see how it goes. And you can always change the price. You don't have to stick with it. Just because you've come up with a price doesn't mean you have to keep it forever. You can make small iterations and see what works, what doesn't. Maybe you can add different options, maybe a one-on-one coaching session for people who want to go deeper. There are an unlimited amount of options and inspiration to, you
Yeah,
know.
it's so very true. With content creation, right? One thing I've always struggled with, and I see many content creators struggle with as well, is how much of the content should be posted on like a network you don't fully control, like let's say Twitter, X, or LinkedIn or Facebook, versus how much of it should be on your own personal blog and brand, which you can basically say is like, it's going to be here for a while. How do you balance that? Because your content is very visual and it is shared very widely, but you also have it on your own site as well. Walk me through a little bit of your thought process there.
Well, that's a good point. I made the mistake to not create a newsletter earlier, because I didn't even know that that was an option when I was starting as a content creator. And then I came across Review, which doesn't exist anymore. I think Twitter acquired Review and then shut it down when Elon Musk bought Twitter. And Review helped me, basically grab my best, like take my best fans or my truest fans and take them to a place that without algorithms, because your account could be suspended any day. You never know. Even by mistake, you don't have to do anything wrong to get blocked on any of these platforms, which is a big risk. And it's pretty dangerous, especially if you've built a business on top of it. So it's always good to have a way to communicate with the people who truly care about you, um, in a way that doesn't involve like algorithms or strict, terms and conditions and whatnot.
So true, and I didn't mind it on review as well, and of course
Oh, really?
yeah, that because it was so easy right before
It
Substack.
was, yes.
It was trivial because before then I used Mailchimp, and Mailchimp was expensive. It was like once you
Oh,
get
yeah.
like over, like like a certain number of subscribers, you're paying like several $100s a month for basically just the ability to like, write some text and send it. And they were the only ones that were basically able to do it at scale, where weren't blocked by spam bots and things like that. And so when review comes, like, wow, this is amazing! Like I can finally, like detach myself from this like hugely expensive operation for basically free. I don't remember ever paying for review actually, maybe for the domain, but
It
I
was
think
free. It was completely free.
really
Yeah.
free. Yeah. And then, and of course, it went away. But luckily, Substack came about and it had this like import feature and things like that. But
Exactly.
yeah, it is
Yeah,
always
Substack is great. Substack works really well.
yeah, and it's such a fun, interesting thing because the incentives are for all the major networks is to capture your audience and make it a part of their own. Like that's their number one goal. It's not to like basically say
Yes,
like, how can I make Ash successful? How can I make Krupa successful? Or like how can I create? So it's like I want to make them successful with the end goal of making my network itself successful. So they constantly
exactly.
tweak the algorithms. Like if you put a link, for example, to say like I want to go explore your website more. I'm gonna tweak the visibility of it so more people cannot see it now because I want to incentivize you to spend more time on the network and not have
Exactly.
a link there. And it is so tricky because as they have gotten more and more prevalent, it almost seems like the way you acquire new traffic is through them. But ultimately, you want to figure out a way to like how do you, again, going back to the game analogy, how do you take those people who are now are seeing you on, let's say, LinkedIn, for example, how do you turn them into people who then go and visit your actual website or newsletter, knowing full well that the traditional ways of like putting a link directly there will mean that you won't get it to showing to various people. So it's like, how do you game the system a bit to make sure that you win and the network wins as well?
Have you found a way? Because every time I post a link to my website or newsletter, I get not blocked, but the tweet or post doesn't get any views, maybe a few views, but it's obviously getting like capped by the algo. So right now I'm struggling with it. I don't know what approach to take to convince people to take a look at my work on my personal website.
Yeah, so I don't have a perfect answer yet. I'm still experimenting and trying it out. But one thing I've done recently is for especially for like the video chats that you and I are having right now, I take very small clips, like let's say like 15 or 20-second clip of what I think is like a really interesting part that people would really like, and I just post only that to the networks directly and say like, and include that as like a kind of like a
Oh, I see.
in some ways. And that gets people like, oh wow, that's actually an interesting insight. Let me dig in and do a little bit more. At which point the friction of like opening the first comment or things like that, it's perfectly worthwhile because the people are hooked. They're bought in on the same thing. And I do a lot of long form content writing. And so for what I do for those things is that I actually create a small video of me scrolling through the entire article from top to bottom. So people are like, oh, it's not just a traditional article. There's like visuals and animation and things like that. And so that gets people hooked as well. So that's what I found is like a way of trying it out. But the
I
thing is,
see.
though, I also see like other people who do none of that. They just post a link directly and then it's just like, put everything in the first tweet to take them away from, let's say, Twitter or LinkedIn, and they get massive engagement also. So I'm like, I'm
Interesting.
doing something wrong or there's something that, needs to be done better. But, my 90% of my content is Google search. Like I aim for the long tail where I'm not going to be writing about the most cutting edge or latest things, but over a period of time, when you have actual questions using some of this, you'll find me as like one of the top results on Google. So I
Oh,
opt heavily for that particular model. So I'm not very active in social media in that sense because it's time consuming. The
it
all the
is.
best studies I've seen is like you need to post regularly, daily, multiple times a day
Yeah.
for like TikTok and things. I'm like, I don't have time for that. And so I'm just gonna post when I can, hope people find value with it. But through Google, they'll be able to find me. Downside, of course, is that that connection between you, the person, and the content you're creating is completely lost if you're going through Google because the problem people are solving is like very transactional. It's like I'm trying to
I
figure out a way
see.
to solve something. They go there, spend 15 seconds with the answer, they leave and never come back. And so my bounce rates are very, very high. And it's again, I haven't figured out what works, but I figured out many ways that don't work yet. So I feel like I'm narrowing in eventually on a solution.
So you've been focusing on SEO essentially.
Correct, correct, and not in a
Okay,
traditional
interesting.
sense where I'm like using these like tools to see like what the top keywords are and things like that. It's mostly on like what's the problem that I'm having as someone who enjoys
I
developing,
see.
and I just write about that, and I make sure to link to other content I've created. But I've never actually done like a proper SEO like analysis and things like that. I've done it a long time ago, and everything that needed to be done as a part of it just seemed like a little gamification to me. And I was like, I don't want to do some of these kind of things because it doesn't feel right. And of course, I also work at Google as part of my day job, and so I'm like, no, I don't want to do anything that might like cause any like wrong kind of publicity for myself.
Yeah.
That'll like makes my day job complicated. So I'm like, nope, I'm just gonna post content, do the best I can, and if the content clicks, great. If it doesn't, it's okay. I'm just gonna keep creating content, and I'll win with volume.
I see. So what do you think about AI then? Because I keep seeing people on Twitter mentioning that SEO is completely dead. There's no point in focusing on it anymore because chats will basically replace Google search, which isn't true in my case because I keep using Google search like 80% of the time. I only use chats when I have a very technical specific problem that I need to dig into. But in most cases, I just prefer just searching and see what comes up. What do you think?
I think it's a risk. I think for a certain class of things that people use search for today, I think they will find themselves using an AI assistant more. I'll give you an example with some data actually. The number of keywords that hit Google Search Console for me, like let's say about a year ago, was around like 10 million, keywords per
Wow.
month. Go through Google and come there. Today it's around 2 million, and that 80%
Wow.
drop is 100% attributed in amount 100%, but largely attributed to people going like, the most common questions are like, how do I make a webcam work in my HTML, or how do I round a corner in my canvas? Those are the exact same questions you can ask an AI assistant, and the AI assistant will only give you like a verbal answer. It'll give you the code snippet and everything directly for you there. So the most common things that people would search for technical things on Google before, I think they're increasingly using an AI, which makes sense because the audience they tend to target is tech savvy enough where they are going to be using an AI assistant for a lot of the work they're doing as well. And so for me, direct traffic to my site has dropped significantly because they're clicking the links through like Google. They're getting similar information actually from my website in the AI results. Because if you look at the attribution for it, it's like Wikipedia or Group.com and things like that. But at that point, though, right, you're presenting your content in the frame of whatever the AI assistant is. Your logo is missing the things that make you visually be like, oh, this orange and this like pixelated look and design that's Group.'s website, that is completely glossed over. So you kind of become this very impersonal messenger of information, but the
Yeah.
personality that I tend to go for is completely lost. And so I pivoted more to doing videos actually because I'm like, okay, right,
Oh,
I'm
interesting.
that text-based content at this point is going to be commodity. There's going to be no more text-based content I'm going to create that will really be unique and as part of it. It's going to be AI assistant based. It's going to be regurgitated by the AI. At some point, it'll be combined with other sources of information. So what the end user gets will be a higher quality result where it combines my answer and the answer from like other really smart people and things like that. So I'm like, it's not the right thing for me to go against that because the developer who's asked this question is getting the best possible result. So it's good for them that that I do this. And video isn't something they've been able to replicate just yet. I've seen the transcription demos where you can type in some script, give you some examples of yourself talking, and it creates these versions for you. It's good, but it's missing some of the quirks. And in a lot of my videos, I actually use like slides and visuals as part of talking to
Yeah.
it. It hasn't been able to mix and match those things effectively yet. I'm saying the word yet because I do absolutely see a world where it's going to be doable. Because if they can create all these other things, it's not rocket science to basically take me talking and have like some slides and visuals created and have this all work. But it's a constant battle to chase after, like make sure technology doesn't completely catch up to you. And so that's what I've been doing. And of course, I also publish books. I work with some publishers
Yeah.
to take content. And there's a large enough audience worldwide. There, I often get emails from people going like, I'm in this library and I saw this book and I learned about it. It's actually really cool. So there's a world that will not be, using the internet and AI and all these things, at least early on. And so I still have that outlet right now. But if you ask me 5 years from now, I think it'll be a very different answer, almost to the point where I'm like, you know what? I'm basically just doing live sessions from like teaching people in real life because that hasn't been replaced with AI just
I
yet.
see.
I hope it doesn't get there, but it very well might.
Well, it's a very uncertain future we have. Very interesting. I think about it a lot. I even lose sleep about it, thinking about it. I'm curious, do you post those videos on YouTube or where do you post them?
I post them on YouTube. That's where they go
Okay.
because it's long form, and I also, like to have like I built a network over the years on YouTube itself, and that's where it goes. And then I post like maybe like short 5-10 second versions of it on Twitter. I
Okay.
used to link it in Twitter and you get the thumbnail preview below, but of course the algorithm is like, no, just upload the videos directly. So now I upload the videos as well, and I've now gotten the model where I actually record my videos in this format in PowerPoint where I have like basically two halves of the screen. And why I've done it that way is that makes it easy for me to then repurpose that into TikTok videos with vertical as opposed to horizontal without any modification. And at some point, I'm going to talk about like how I do that, in the future. But yeah, it's because like otherwise, I'm spending a lot of time going like, okay, Instagram needs to be square ratio, LinkedIn needs to be widescreen, YouTube.
True.
If it's under a minute, it needs to be vertical, and then like TikTok needs to be vertical. I'm like, I don't have time for this. My goal is to educate people and do all these things. And I also like to learn these tools so that way I can empathize with the creators. And I build tools for a living at my day job as well. So I'm like, I like to learn how decisions are made, why people do the things they do, and creating the tools the way they create them. And so I didn't want to outsource that or like defer that to someone else, even though they probably do a much better job than me in doing all of this. And so I've been like tweaking all these ways on making my video creation as efficient as possible.
Oh, that's so interesting. It's easy to tell you're an engineer.
Oh yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, I'm an engineer who likes video games, and so it basically is like a combination of like the best of both worlds.
I mean, the two key words are optimization and efficiency.
Exactly. The thing is, like, when I was like, much younger and I had like no obligations, I had like all the time in the world to like, fiddle with this, right? Now my time is like very constrained. Have a family and all these things. I'm like, I don't want to like miss out on like, all of that. And so where
Yeah,
I can optimize is on these things because like, I don't want to optimize
exactly.
on like the time I spend with my wife and daughter and like, family members and friends. I'm like, no, that's like the thing that's gonna be, lasting forever. But I can absolutely like, be like, you know what? That TikTok video, it's okay. It's not zoomed in exactly right. It's I could have pushed the larger version with a smaller screen. It's okay. If you really want to look at a coding screencast, go to YouTube. But if you're on TikTok and you're still watching it, you probably something is interesting to you. So just go ahead and I'm sacrificing like quality for speed. Like kind of a bad image compression algorithm. It's like yeah, JPEG is fine. You know what? It's fine. It's fine. Yes, PNG would be better, but I'm just gonna 80% JPEG out the door, done. Not even talking about it.
Well, it's worth it in the end, right? Because you get to spend more time with your loved ones doing what you love. So that's what matters at the end of the day, especially if all this content will get commoditized. There's no point
Exactly
in
right.
spending thousands of hours, obsessing over a Zoom or something.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you also see like the worry in like Hollywood and like the other movie studios where they're like, I think like some of the one of the more recent like I think contract negotiations and strikes really caused by like the use of AI in making all these visuals and these things work. And I watched Dune 2 recently, and I'm like, fantastic movie, absolutely like amazing. But then I'm also like, how long will it be before AI can create some of these scenes? Because like yes, the director is extremely talented, so it cannot create some of those shots exactly the way it was done. But at some point, though, AI is all about this training. It just trains on legacy data and then creates it based on that world. So unless you're like pushing the envelope, which very few directors probably are, majority are like trying to create great content using traditional techniques. That's the kind of world where AI is always going to be like, yeah, this is fine. If you're using a style that like Spielberg or Scorsese or someone else like came up with like a couple of decades ago, and like how you pan and zoom and so on, we will absolutely create a video of exactly that sort. And so the question then becomes, how much time do you spend staying on the cutting edge? We're just like one step ahead of the AI before you get just burned out.
Well, I think the key is not to compete against AI. This is what I've realized. Instead, focus on your own personal stories and double down on your personality. So in your case, you're obviously a really funny person. You have really good humor and you have a really obvious personality. So instead of writing really technical like articles for people who are trying to solve a very specific problem, double down on your way of communicating things like Ali Abdal does, he started sharing very like transactional or like informational content, and people discovered him because of the problems he was solving, but people decided to stay because they liked how he talked, how he communicated his ideas. And it doesn't matter what the videos are about, people will watch them because they resonate with who he is. And I don't think AI can compete with that just yet or in any time soon, because again, it's human, that's human nature. So that's what I want to focus this year is in creating a deeper connection with my audience and with anyone who likes my stuff. And I'm still thinking of how to do it, but I think that's what I'll double down on.
Yeah, very, very, it doesn't really good path to pursue. And I noticed that you also do YouTube videos. I think you posted your first video, I think, a few
My
weeks ago.
first video this
How did
last
that
month.
come out?
Yeah.
How did that come out? What tools did you use? How did that whole
Oh,
process go?
well, first and foremost, that took ages to put together. So I obviously underestimated the amount of time it would take me to create a video at that level because I animated each frame by hand because I'm a perfectionist. And it took me quite a lot of time. I used Procreate to animate each frame traditionally, essentially. And I also used DaVinci Resolve, the free version, to just stick everything together. And then I just recorded a voiceover. and it was great fun. I really it took a lot of work, so it's unsustainable. I'm now trying to look for a much better way to do it. But oh my goodness, did I have fun? It was so rewarding, and I got a chance to go deeper. And I'll definitely be showing my face on the next videos and experimenting with different ways of doing things.
It's the thing, like showing your face makes it more personal. That's the other
Exactly.
to it as well. So how to make the squiggly lines like actually look like they're waving their every frame? Like was it did you do it manually or was it like a tool that did it automatically for you?
No, I used DaVinci for that. So that was helpful. Yes, I like that you noticed that. I was so happy when I discovered that DaVinci Resolve had this feature. It's just an effect that you can create using nodes, connecting them together. Took
Yep.
me quite a bit of time to figure out, but now I have this way of making things look like more fancy than they really are. But everything else was frame by frame. And if you pair a few animations with this effect, it looks like the whole thing is animated by hand. So that was a sneaky trick I used.
No, it's actually really cool. And I also like how you describe it. You actually are building nodes and you're connecting the nodes to basic, creating this output because, like I said, I work in developer tools and design tools my entire career. Like I started with Flash many years ago. Then I started
Wow.
working at Microsoft creating developer tools and design tools. So for me, it's always been fascinating to see like how can you use tools to help people be more creative and build things in a way that is also scalable. So that way, when you're handing it off to a developer and things like that, it really works well. And I just like how you were naturally able to go like, yeah, I'm just connecting nodes and make these things work because the reason is that there's always an old saying in tools, right? Maybe me, like maybe 10 other people probably talk about all the time, is like you want to solve the problem, the domain you're solving it in. So if you're having a visual problem, you want to solve it visually. You don't want,
Oh,
let's say you
that's a
want
good point.
let's say you want to draw a square or a circle, right? You don't want to write code or like like letters to draw a square. You want to be like just draw a square. Like I'm going to use it like a pencil icon or whatever, draw the circle. And what we found over the years is that when it comes to modifying the properties of something, especially if it's like a cause and effect kind of a relationship, the node based drawing is the one that people resonate with more naturally, which is why you see in like the most basic example is like in music, electronic music. You often have like the amps and you have like the mixers and so on. It's just a series of wires that connect to like various other mixers and like all these things, and it naturally resonates. So you might be like, wait, I'm doing music, but something in our brain makes this cause and effect thing with like boxes and lines just naturally work. And so you try to see like so many cases, like so many 3D tools specifically, or animation tools and rigging tools and so on. They always use this like line and box concept for making these things work visually. And it's always been like fascinating to see that carried over even today, because people are like, once tools get better, no one's ever going to do this. Like 30 years ago, like AutoCAD and like, did like some of these things early on, but even now it's like still being used. It's always great to see that style of solving problems and tooling continuing.
Well, even website builders, right? Back then you had to use code to build a simple HTML layout, and now you can just use Framer, for example, which is what I use to build my websites. And you can do it 10x faster and have much more fun in the process. And you don't have to spend hours wrestling with HTML and CSS to just create a very basic layout.
Exactly, right. If I had to pick like one field where that AI is going to completely turn upside down, it really is web development in so many ways. Because and the reason why I say that is back in the day, this is how you built websites. You used like Dreamweaver or Front Page, and you did it
Oh,
visually,
yeah.
and then you published it. At some point in the middle, it was like, no, you must learn all the internal details of how something needs to be done, and that got the world really complicated. Where to get Hello World up on screen, you spend like couple of days of like learning about all these weird extra things, and now we're back to a model where what a web page is basically text on page. It's visuals. It's something that is just
Exactly.
you know it's just something that I can easily see and make sense of. There's no reason why it needs to be done in all these very complicated ways. Like the abstractions will truly be abstracted away by AI and by tools.
Oh, it's a really good point, and it makes me think because, as you already know, I've been trying to learn the basics of code in the past few months, and I've been having a lot of fun. But there's this voice in my head that keeps telling me that I'm just wasting my time and that I should just focus on something else. And I don't know if I should find a middle ground or if maybe this is the best time ever to learn how to code. Because if you know how to code, you can leverage AI much better. That's also true, right? Because you have to know what to ask in order to get a decent result. So what do you think? Because you're a complete expert and I would love to hear your thoughts. Is it worth it? Am I wasting my time?
I mean, it goes back in one of two ways, right? Like, let's use an example of like, you want to paint a really great, great masterpiece on like canvas,
Yeah.
for example, right? Some schools, they'll tell you to do that first, get the wood, buy the canvas, stretch the
Oh
canvas
my
out on the wood
gosh.
yourself, learn how to mix the paints, buy the basic powders, mix it together, add the ratio right, and all these things. And that'll give you a more fundamental understanding of what you ultimately want to do. Your goal, of course, is to create like something you have an idea in your head. You want to visualize it. You want to go from like zero to an idea to something that I can show people, and like that's my destination. I want to share what I created with the world. That's the fastest path I want to get there. Now, the question is, can you get there? Can you show people something that that truly represents what you're trying to create without having to learn all these fundamental steps and things like that? If you're someone who's in the business of selling the wood, selling the canvas, or making the paint mixtures and so on, you're going to be like, no, you absolutely need to know this. You need to know all of these things. When I look at web development, I find that group of individuals dominates so much of the conversation. They always are like the ones who work for like the big tool makers or the framework makers or the nitty gritty details. So like, oh, you must learn React, you must learn Vue, you must learn Angular, you must learn
Okay.
all these things. For some people, you might need to know that because what you're creating needs to require that level of thing. For 90% of the world, you don't. You just want to go to an art store, buy the canvas the way it's already made. You just buy the brushes, buy the acrylics or oil painting. Acrylics are great because they dry quickly and it effect is mostly pretty good in many ways as well. Just do that, and you have an idea you can share with people. And most of the world will not know the difference between did Ash make that painting by stretching the canvas on his own, or you go to store and just make the canvas. They're going to be mesmerized by what
Yeah,
you
yeah.
ultimately create. And so from that point of view, when you look at it entirely from like who am I building it for and will they care, 90% of the answer is no. Do the shortest level of steps you need to take to make them happy, which in the case of websites and web development, you don't need to go and do all these things. Like I've been blogging now for like almost since 1998, so almost like 26 years at this point. I still use Dreamweaver even today, and people are like,
Oh,
wait,
really?
I'm like, I use Dreamweaver and I use FTP and I use Cloudflare for my CD, and I'm like, yeah, it works. While you're spending like 6 months learning about this latest technology, I spend those 6 months creating content and creating all these things, and no one knows, like no one cares when they visit your website, going like, I
Exactly.
built it. It's like, wait, they're like, wow, it's really fast, loads really snappy, works on a mobile device, it's accessible. I'm like, great, I hit all the check marks. How I built it, it's entirely up to me on how I did that.
Exactly. Imagine a user refusing to use the website because it hasn't built on the latest framework, right? It doesn't make sense. No
It
one
doesn't make
cares.
sense. Exactly. And so that's why I look at, like you mentioned earlier, right? AI is a tool. It's just going to help you, speed up your process and how you get your ideas through. That's exactly how I view everything that we do in general as well. It's like I might have an incentive to say, you must use tools A, B, and C and then have this approach. But if I take a step back though, that's just my incentive. The end result for the user is not going to be very valuable. So it really is about like the problem you're trying to solve. And I think for 90% of people, maybe even 100% of people, probably like, a year from now, all you need is like maybe a newsletter, maybe like WordPress, still very, very great for like being able to create content, have a theme, you can customize it, personalize it the way
Yeah.
you want to. So the less amount of time you can spend on the mechanics of getting something done as opposed to just getting something done, I think that's like really the best way. Like I call it theatrics, like it's a classic thing of like, especially in
Interesting.
large organizations and companies, you work as a web developer for an agency and things like that. It's like, some of the work you do is just optics. It's just to kind of give you the illusion they're really doing work, but the reality is that there's no real purpose. It doesn't adjust the quality of your output by you making
Yeah.
this approach or not. It's just dogma that teams and people follow. And so I've been very much on a, how can I make sure I don't fall into the trap of mistaking the optics of doing something with actually doing something. And it's so easy to get in that trap at some point where you're like, oh, I spent 6 months creating Hello World in React, when the reality was like you never need to do it in the first place because that's not why you started doing this. And if you want to learn it, great. But if your goal was to build a website or if you want to build something to share with people, you probably spent way too much time on something that didn't move you closer to that goal.
That's interesting, and I agree. However, as long as you enter the realm of web apps, not just websites with content, I think it's beneficial to understand the fundamentals because then the difference is exponential when you use AI. Because if you understand how things work, and you don't have to be an expert, just learn the basics, maybe go through the Odin project, right? And
Yeah.
just go through the basics. Then you can ask ChatGTP much, much better questions and you can create proper apps, not just content apps that actually work and scale. So that's where I'm at right now because I've been thinking of building a few ideas I've had, but I don't know enough to leverage AI to build them, right? So I know
Yeah.
plenty to create content websites. That's amazing, and it has been completely democratized for most people. However, as long as you want to build, as soon as you want to build an app, I think you need to have some level of understanding to build something decent.
And absolutely true. It's like you don't know what you don't know sometimes. And the
Yep.
more you
Yeah.
know about the behind the scenes details, like you mentioned, you'll be able to more precisely use the right words and right choices because it's always very subtle, right? And it's kind of like to
Exactly.
go from like, something that shows like, 50% mastery of a topic to like 80% mastery. It's only 30% is a number, but the reality is it might be like 2 years of like
Huge.
intense training
Exactly.
to get that point. But then you can quickly spot someone who has that extra 30% of knowledge because when you talk to them, you get that sense of like, okay, they know they can jump back and forth in time and in depth and breadth of the topic to be able to quickly get you to the answer you're trying to get to and even foresee where we might be going next. So the solution they're providing, it has like experience baked into it behind the scenes. So yeah, very true.
We'll see where all this goes. It's all a matter of experimenting, having fun. We're so early in the process, right? And we're only getting started when it comes to AI. There's so much to do, so much to see.
Yeah, but I still do hold the hope that, even if you're building like a very heavy app, you don't need to know all those details. Like all you need to
Wow.
know is like, here's like let's say a slide deck of like the screens that my app needs to have, or here's I'm gonna verbally describe my application like a traditional spec or a product requirements document PRD, and I'm gonna give it to my AI assistant. It's gonna create the entire website for me with all the
Wow.
interactions and things like that. I do think we'll get there, probably sooner rather than not. And because I'm seeing like early signals of like people being able to build single page websites with just like a screenshot of their design or like a sketch on a napkin and using AI to make this work. And then you look
Yeah.
at tools like both like Microsoft's Power Apps, which are using some AI capabilities on. You see Builder.io has a lot of tools for like building like like apps based on a template, but like, using AI to extrapolate large amount of details for it. I think there's going to be a world where what we call professional developers, the ones who know how to make the canvas and to tie the wood together and so on, and then we have like low code and no code, like your framers and like your web flows of the world. That's going to meld together because the end result really is, can you look at the output and be able to be like, okay, I told my AI to create something for me. It created 10 versions of what it thinks my actual idea of the final design should be. Do I have enough context to be able to choose which of those 10 I like, which of these 10 I do not like, and then use that to help the AI refine it further and further? In many cases, at this point, you become more like a creative director or like an art director where you have a
I
team of
see.
people
Yeah.
pitching you ideas. You know enough about the industry or the context to be like, this is a good idea, this is a bad idea, but that doesn't maybe always require you to know like what kind of pen did they use for making the art or what is the thickness of the board they printed this on. You need to know all that. The bigger question is, will my client like it? Will this sell and things like that? Which might be an art director's kind of a thing. Every domain has their own set of like areas where they're going to be focusing on. Like I always imagine in my case, right? I would love to be able to be like, tell an AI like, I want to teach people this complicated way of sorting numbers. I want to do so in a way that's humorous, includes visuals, use my old visual style to like, learn from that. And then it creates like 10 variations of a document for me. And I'm like, okay, I like this. I don't like this. I like the intro in this one. I don't like the way you describe the body part of this one. Too much fluff here, too much humor, unnecessary. And then it goes back, uses my feedback to create round two and round three and round four. At that point, I do think that the output, based on how I prompted and how I interpreted, would be exactly what I wanted to do without me actually having written a single word or drawn a single pixel without actually having, outside the prompt that I gave it. I do
Yeah.
think programming will get to that world. And so like I always think about like, should students learn computer science today or should they go into like, learning really deep technical skills? Should they go into it? My hunch is like, no, probably not, because as long as you know what makes a good app and what doesn't make a good app, usually based on output, like, is it performant? Is it look good on my phone? Like all
User experience.
user experience, like that's what really matters. How it gets built at that point, I don't care. I don't care if the AI is using like React or if it's using like some like library like like Motion or Frame or whatever. I don't really care at that point because all I really care about is I have a problem. my customers have a problem, my users have a problem. Is my app helping you to solve that? This goes back to what we talked about earlier. Is like, will people really care how you create your visuals or like how you create some of these things, as long as it
Exactly.
conveys the message very, very effectively? And so yeah, so I guess to answer your question from like a lot in a roundabout, view, is like, no, I don't. It's good for you to learn it after you've gotten to the point where like I have a product market, I have some breathing room. I just want I'm curious to know like how was some of these things done. Like I like to learn about like older programming languages just because I'm like, oh, I'm curious to see what it does. But I wouldn't make that my first step as part of what I'm doing. It's mostly a curiosity thing of like I just want to get deeper into what I'm already doing, but it wouldn't be at the expense of not having shipped anything, not having solved the main problems here to solve.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And also remember that no code is someone else's code. So someone will have to maintain all these codes. So we would still need new computer scientists to do that,
Oh,
don't you think?
absolutely. But if you look at the number of people you need for that though, it becomes very, very different. But here's the thing, right? Let's say the market is, this large. I'm going to make it a screen so it actually shows up here. And in order to build a website, like let's say, I want to create like ashlam.com. In a world
Yeah.
before we had low code and no code and so on, it required me to understand HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And I understand like where do I host it, how do I make sure it's performant and things like that. And then after that, how do I need to learn about the visual skills that you have, like the colors, the rounded corners, like arrangement of things, the style of presenting like testimonies, things like that. So it requires shifting from like a very technical, mechanical world to more of a creative world. And then it's the content itself. Like how do I write the words in a way that makes sense? Like how do I get people like, hooked on like the tagline before they go further into it? Like how do I style the last word in the sentence so that it gets extra emphasis? Like that's where the art and creativity comes in, that you can't really teach people. You just have to learn it through like your indirect ways of like your history in art and sketching and having observed great designers and great artists and things like that. So it requires you to learn a huge set of like skills over a period of time that it takes probably 5, 6, 10 years, maybe a lifetime for some people to ultimately get better at. But if now you're able to say like, what, I can bypass all this HTML, CSS, and JS jargon. I can I'm going to bypass all that. I'm not even going to bypass like the copywriting angle of it, because the AI does a really good job, like taking like look at like what David Ogilvy did for like marketing, like in the 50s, for
Yeah.
example. Like learn from his style of marketing and use that in making this work. And so now what we've done is like we've taken jobs and roles that required like 4 or 5, 3 or 4 people who had went to college, went to like degrees and so on, to be like, nope, it's being done by AI altogether. And so now you're basically at the point where like the real big value you're adding is your uniqueness. What makes you tick, like your combination of philosophy and art and all of these things into like your final output. That's what the AI can't really create, at least hopefully not for a very long time. And so that's the part you're focusing on. Everything is automatically abstracted away for you. And so that means the number of people you needed before to like make this work has gone down significantly. The time it was spent on learning about this has gone down significantly as well. And so you will need computer scientists, but you only need computer scientists, those who genuinely care about creating frameworks and creating these tools, because they're like, oh, I love waking up every morning. I love creating tools. That's me. I love creating tools. I love
Yep,
filling
that's you.
emails with AI and things like that. Great. But there aren't too many of me out there. I can count on like maybe like, probably about 50 people in the industry that I know of, like who have that same
Wow.
passion. It was probably a lot larger, like, 8, 9 years ago when I first got in the industry. They're like, between Adobe and Microsoft and IBM and Autodesk and so on. I was like, okay, there's a lot of people who are doing tooling and things like that, as part of their day-to-day job. Now it's like a smaller and smaller number. And it's not because people don't care about tooling anymore. It's just that there's not an opportunity anymore where you can use that to basically make things work. We've commoditized around like VS Code and like all these various areas. Like it's a great place to be. And so that's what's gonna happen to computer science as well. You will still need computer scientists, but you won't need them in the number you needed before to be able to create the kinds of things needed, because those jobs will no longer be as relevant as they were. You might have them. Will you be able to command the same amount of like salary and like your quality of life and things like that? Probably not. And this is going to be kind of like the old example of, in the 1700s, there were a lot of people who made horseshoes and like, blacksmiths and so on. And then as cars became more popular, as things became more resilient, and we had like carbon fiber and things like that, you didn't really need as much smithing work as much as you might have needed to before. And so you had creative destruction as a classic term for like people who went from like an older task to being able to do something new. My only worry with AI specifically is, okay, the idea is that you now you replace like lower value tasks with higher value tasks, and it's a constantly shifting scale. But with AI replaces some of these things, what is the higher value task? Because the higher value task itself, what we've been told is like going to be irreplaceable for a long time, is being replaced very rapidly in the kind of creative thinking, like legal, like law
Yeah.
professions and accountants and actuaries and things like that. I'm like, okay, so what do we do with all these individuals? Like, what is the transition? It's people who were in like blacksmithing, they can become machinists and tooling specialists and so on. The jump was high, but there was a path here. But you take someone who's like a computer scientist, what is their next step? Where would they go after that? Like, what skills do they learned that'll then make them be effective? It's like, oh, they're math, they know mathematics, they can like do, use mathematics. I'm like, well, AI can do that as well. Like, I ask AI any question about like, model the growth of like the bird population in like North America when, the weather is X, Y, and Z. It'll give me that answer very quickly and give me the work. And I'm like, that's actually reasonably well done. That's my worry, is that, where does creative destruction take us when there isn't anything beyond what we can
Exactly.
actually do that's going to command a quality of life that's hopefully better. Machinists made more than blacksmiths. Blacksmiths made more than the people who were like digging in the mines too.
Yeah.
I am not carve out the ore. Whereas I don't know what's going to be like. What is the next big thing that we can all work on? Because the world doesn't need an infinite prompt engineers. Because prompt engineering brings the skill set back down to anybody who has an idea and a way of
True.
representing it. They can be effective in it. So yeah. So that's the worry. That's what keeps me up at night.
Well, the next step is enlightenment.
Exactly right. In life, right? You often talk about like
Yeah.
universal basic income and things like that. I
Yeah.
don't know where it's going to land, and I think we have to figure out quicker because if people were told like 5 years ago that AI will create full motion 4K videos that look almost like
Well,
real
yeah.
person, I'm like, you're like absolutely not. You're being like you're being too alarmist here. But given the speed at which we were seeing things moving, this is an answer we need to find out sooner.
It's fascinating. Yeah, I saw Sora last month and I was blown away. Those videos look completely realistic and they'll be definitely replacing stock footage as far as
Oh,
I'm concerned.
100%. Yes. Yes. Like I stopped using like stock libraries for a lot of times. I'm like, you know what? I can just actually get sprite sheets for like some of the things that I do from the AI assistant and and then use that and modify it on my own.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about. It's a bit sad in some ways, right? Especially
Yep.
as a creative, because I love creating for the sake of creating. And I'm not looking for ways to optimize my process. So I'll see where this leads.
Yeah, and also one last thing, by the way, before we start wrapping up, is like, for your videos, right? So I used to
Yeah.
never have a background music loop in my videos because I'm like, okay, I don't know which sound library I should use, like how to create it, and the ones I want to use, like do a drum beat, way too expensive. And then I found this AI music generator by Google. They created like I think it's like the AI
Okay.
Music Lab or something like that. You just describe like I want to create like a basic like drum beat or like an ambient space loop or something like that. It creates like 8 9 versions of it, and there's a little checkbox that's like, do you want this to be loopable? I'm like, yes, make it loopable. So it clicks like the beginning and the end of it, and I'll like adjust it to make it work. It's been so convenient. So like every video now, I have a different, very quiet, like 30% volume loop that goes on in the background, and I'm like, and I was able to do that using AI because I have zero. I play the piano, but I have zero, idea of like how do I create music on a computer, basically, like what MIDI tools I use and so on. Like, so I had no idea about it, but AI was able to solve that for me. And I look at that going like, there's gonna be a world where people don't know coding or don't know how to create visuals. They don't know how to use Photoshop or Procreate or Illustrator or any of these, or Figma, for example, right? They use
Yeah.
AI. And just like I was like blown away by, like, I now have music in my videos, they're gonna have visuals in their content as well. A professional musician would be like, wow, that loop is low quality. That's like terrible music. What are you doing?
Yeah, true.
But to me, who has no idea what isn't or isn't good, I'm like, this solved it for me. And so that was like one of the epiphanies I had, was like, there's gonna be more and more of it where, people, especially my daughter's like gonna be 6 years old. She might grow up in a world where she's able to create things without realizing the details of how it goes into creating it. And that's what's really actually the exciting part about AI as well. I mean, talking about a bit of doom and gloom here, but the exciting part is more people out there will now be able to be part of the what we call the creator economy and be able to do really good things. The question, of course, is how do existing creators, and is the economy large enough to support that many
Exactly.
people? And
But
that's
will
the
content be valuable enough by then? Because if
exactly
everyone can do it, then no one, well, not no one can, but if everyone can do it, then the value diminishes maybe.
exactly the whole supply and demand kind of a thing, right? I felt like for a long
Yeah,
time there was always demand, but supply was limited because few people knew the magic tricks to like get everything up and running. But in a
true.
world where supply becomes infinite, we've always seen that demand doesn't scale. Only so many people in the world, and the population like shrinking in many countries as well. It's like, how do you maintain a certain level of quality and things and sustain a living for all the content creators when it becomes a commodity?
Everyone will be a media company.
Exactly, right. A walking media can all you need is your phone
Yes,
and
a
voice
working media
assistant.
company. Yeah, it's gonna be mind blowing. In fact, Netflix won't even exist because people will create their own movies on the spot.
They will. Did you ever play? Did you ever play? I think what's it called, Balderdash. It was an interactive Netflix movie where it actually like the movie plays and
Oh,
various
interesting.
interactive questions, and then depending on the answer you choose, the scene changes completely. Have you played some of those?
I haven't, but it reminds me of The Witcher.
Exactly. It's basically live action film now has like choices you make based on like what you're doing, and it changes it. But imagine that becomes dynamic, where before it required someone to actually be in a set, required recording all these like 80 different variations. But in the future, it'll be procedurally generated. You just specify what
Yeah,
happens. And I think like for me, the thing that's going to be most exciting is like I love like gritty TV shows like The Wire or The Sopranos and things like that.
yeah.
Those shows have ended. But imagine with AI, I'm like, give me two more seasons of Sopranos, and the AI creates new seasons of shows that have ended. The actors, some of them have already like passed away, like in James Gandolfini, passed away like a while ago. But they're able to create new episodes, and it looks and feels exactly like the same thing. Those are some of the things where I'm like, I feel bad for the creators. I feel bad like David Chase who created The Sopranos and so on. But as
Yeah.
a consumer of the content, I'm like, this is perfect. And the thing is, my version of Sopranos that created for me will be very different than your version of it, because of your interest and taste that it optimizes for. So we're creating this like really interesting world where personalization is taken to like an unnatural extreme level.
It's crazy. I mean, as they say, what's the phrase? What's a popular quote? The one about I can't remember now. Reality is always crazier than science fiction,
Yes.
right? So we're about to experience a completely like Ready Player One, the popular movie and book.
Yes, yes,
Will be
yes, yes.
something similar to that at some point, I imagine. Something completely crazy where we have the option to immerse ourselves in this VR, AR world where we can create our own reality on the spot, and then no one wants to get out of this world because why live in the real world if you can just be in a simulation? Maybe we are in a simulation anyway.
Exactly right. Exactly. Well, Ash, it's been great chatting with you about everything we started off talking about, and then we deviated into AI. But
Exactly.
but it was a
It's the
blast.
elephant in the room. It's the elephant in the room.
It is the elephant in the room. So, any parting thoughts? Anything that you want the audience to know before we end it?
Well, two things. Firstly, I'll be writing maybe not long form, but I'll be writing a newsletter issue about AI because I just want to synthesize everything I've learned. And you should too. I don't know if you've written a long form post already about AI, but I would love to have, a proper piece from you too.
I want to write it. The thing is like, this goes deeper into like my style of writing content, because my day job involves like living at the intersection of tools and AI and basically bringing to reality a lot of things that I talk about. I always am trying not to like blend the waters too much, where like I might have an opinion that goes very much against what like Google as a whole might have, which they very well might have as well. And I'm like, I have so many other things I could rather talk about and not create conflict and drama, because
I see.
drama will always seek me. So these are some topics that I will talk to you about, like in a podcast, more casual form, or in person. It might be a while before I write about it in like a written form, mostly because I don't want to add to the existing narrative on AI that these companies spend a lot of time like crafting with like all these various people. But it is in the
Yeah.
back of my mind always, though.
Yeah, you're in a tricky situation. I forgot about that.
But it's a fun trick. It's constraints, like you mentioned, right? I
Yes,
don't
exactly.
all the a lot of people do talk about things they work in their jobs as well, but that also creates this create unnecessary things that take time away from things I do care about. 'Cause I do enjoy the things I do in my day job that aren't related to AI specifically. So I'm like, why would I muddy the waters a bit when I don't have to? It's really the way I look at it. But I look forward to reading your things, though. I'll
I
comment
will.
on.
I'll let you know when it's out. I can't
Yeah.
wait. It'll be pretty contrarian, I'll tell you that, because I
Oh,
have a few ideas
I'll
lingering around.
the nice thing about contrarian takes these days is that I know that AI did not write it, because if it's the
Yeah,
same
that's a good
as
point.
it's trained by AI, so I'm like, okay, this is basically learned from like 80 million versions of the same content. But if it's completely different, I'm like, oh, this is a unique take. But I'm also just waiting for the AI to be like, write a contrarian take on on the future of AI. I might just start doing that as well. So I'm not even like, whatever I say, the shelf life of how I predicted AI will go, the speed has been rapid, much faster than I ever imagined it would be.
Oh, really? Do you think so?
Oh yeah, it's I imagine like we where we are today. I would thought we'd be like there maybe 2 years from now. That we're already here, completely mind blown.
So you're a technologist. So for how long have you been thinking about AI?
I'd say for almost 10 years. 10 years.
Wow, amazing.
Ever since this goes back to video games again, right? I think it was Skyrim like almost 10, 12 years ago started randomly generating quests for you. I think they call it the Radiant quest system. I
Oh,
think
is
that
that
that's
true? Wow.
yeah, right. So
10 years ago.
yeah, almost like when did Skyrim even come out? Was it like 12 years, 13 years now,
Yeah,
basically?
probably. It's
Probably around
yeah.
that time frame, right? Yeah, so I was like, wait, why is quest the same? I'm going to a cave, it looks different, but it keep collecting a similar set of things over and over again. It never seems to end. And when I went online, I realized to make the game last longer in many cases, these quests are randomly generated. The worlds are randomly generated. The what you do and the people you talk to, dialogue randomly generated. I'm like, wow, this is a I never expected this. And then when I started digging deeper into it, that's when I started realizing, okay, there's going to be a world where AI is going to be more effective in doing some of these things. We're not there yet. We had chatbots forever, right? Go to a support site, you ask a chat a question, it try to like give you some answers. It was pattern matching. It was basically looking at like,
Yeah,
what
true.
keywords you're using and you're pattern matching. And that's been around forever. And if you look at AI in general, airline booking systems, travel systems, they've been using AI for a very long time to make sure like, how do I anticipate peak demand, how do I anticipate delays and things like that. If you look at like a credit card companies, like anti-fraud detection and so on, they've been using AI for like almost 20 years in many ways, where they're like, okay, this person is in locations A, B, and C. Could they have actually been made this purchase, or would they actually, be is this like a fraudulent activity? And so much of AI has been happening under the covers for a very long time. Like photo tagging, like Google Photos, I could search for like
Yeah,
clouds, and
true.
every photo had clouds. Like, well, that was there like years ago, or in iPhones nowadays, where I can like press and select like a picture of somebody. It crops everything else out and makes it crop. That was like almost like 5, 6 years ago that was introduced. So we've always had AI. It was just never in an area that intruded upon my areas of expertise. Where I'm like, yeah, I'm writing code, I'm doing all these things, but AI has always existed, and video games had it. But when I started seeing like the Skyrim example, I'm like, wait a minute, a developer basically programmed all of this and now is able to create this. I'm like, okay, what is it to prevent it from creating a slide deck or a pitch deck that I'm
True.
giving to like my leadership teams? What is it preventing it from like, writing a document on like what is the next big feature we need to do based on this customer feedback we're seeing in all these areas? And that's what got me thinking about AI a long time ago in so many ways. But it wasn't until really ChatGPT came out like almost 2 years ago or 3 years ago. I forget when it came out first,
Time
that I was like,
flies.
wait,
Yeah.
yeah, that's when I was like, wait a minute, this is an actual manifestation of the things that I've been ruminating about for quite some time. We need to solve, get involved in it very, very quickly, and which is why I work on tooling and AI, like at Google right now. It's like
Yeah.
it's been in the back of my mind, always something that ate away at me. But the speed at which we got, I was surprised. I was blindsided, to be fair. Like even though I was thinking about it, I didn't expect it to just happen. And then it happening and evolving and being iterated upon very quickly also completely surprised me. Sora completely blew me away as well. And of course, like the music example I mentioned before, like that was a more personal. I'm like, wow, this actually solved the problem that I actually had, because I had no idea how to make this music loop work without paying a large amount of money, and I didn't even know like if I like it or not. Whereas here, it's like I have infinite choices. I can like change it every single day if I wanted to, and get a new version of it out.
Yeah.
And so,
True.
so that's where I'm like, okay, I've hit the limit of my imagination at this point. Where like, what can AI do and cannot do? I can imagine more things, but nothing is out of the ordinary, out of like the realm of possibility at this point. Like anything is possible, and so that's why I'm like, I still say, yeah, that's why I was like, I'm blindsided by it and surprised at how quickly things have moved.
Well, I'm surprised that you're surprised, because imagine how surprised I am if you've been thinking about AI for 10 years and you're mind blown. I'm 10x more mind blown than you are. So the sky is the limit, I imagine.
Yeah, it very much is, and that's the exciting part about it as well. If I take my my hats off here, and I'm like, okay, what is the AI really going to solve for me? it's going to solve a lot of things. Like one of the things that we worked on recently, and I think we shared it publicly as well. It's like you share a picture of a you show a cupcake to an AI assistant, it'll reverse engineer the ingredients you need to make it. And we
That's
shipped it.
crazy.
Like my team like built it and like we shipped it like pretty recently. And I'm like, these are really cool, fun examples of things that would have never been possible before. Because imagine like watching a movie, for example, right? And you're like, wait, what is that vehicle, or what is that food they're eating on the table? Or they pause, screenshot, send to AI, or just ask the AI like Alexa or Siri or whatever your AI assistant is, explain to you what's going on in the scene. It'll give you all the details. Like imagine you can even know like who's the director of photography for that particular scene, or like what kind of a camera he's using. Little details of that sort are now possible, because of it.
We'll also have a robot eventually that creates that cupcake in real life.
Exactly, and this is like the sci-fi version of like what people thought the world was going to be like. Because you remember like all those books where like here's what the year 2000 will be
Oh
like.
yeah, that's
Flying
it.
cars
That's
or
funny.
robots and things like
Yeah.
that. I think the progress up until the year 2000 was pretty slow, and maybe for the next 15 years that's pretty slow as well. But in the last 5 years, we've gotten so much
Exponential.
faster
Yeah.
at being able to realize the vision of like an H.G. Wells or like someone from like back in the day. And so I'm really excited for some of these things.
Let's see where everything leads. It's interesting. It's exciting, and it's out of our control too. So it's no good worrying about it.
Exactly, right. Just embrace the change, learn to
Yeah.
figure out what it's doing, but don't try to stop it and try to like go against it, because it's like trying to stop like a giant wave that's coming at you. It's like you might succeed for a brief bit, but you might be more successful like using this opportunity to be like I'm gonna ride the wave and like make a like be like a nice surfer video
Oh,
shot.
that would make for a good visual. I'll write
Yeah,
that down. I like
yeah,
that metaphor. That's a good
right.
one. Thank you.
Happy to
Oh,
help.
it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise, Ash. Thank you so
It's
much.
been
Talk to you in a
great
bit.
fun.